the heart of your system.
This is my final Leo Says for 2018, so naturally my thoughts turned to doing a kind of a roundup. Best products, best companies, worst products, worst companies, the hits, the misses. And I thought, well, yeah, what do I just kind of go in my gut on this one? Do I go for which products got the best reviews through the year? I thought, no, let's go for the financials. Let's look at the companies and see which companies have done well financially, badly financially. So I popped off to, is it finance.yahoo.com? And the companies that have done well this year, Adobe, AMD and Amazon. This is obviously in the world of tech. Other companies outside have done nicely as well. Companies that have had an okay year is a longer list. Alphabet, so that's the Google group, Intel, Facebook, Microsoft, Seagate, TSMC, Western Digital. Bad year. This list surprised me. These are companies where their shares are just dropped. Apple, Baidu, Nvidia and Qualcomm. Those four companies between them are like a powerhouse of the tech industry. You'll have seen during the year that Apple, for example, is $1 trillion company. Well, it isn't. It's now worth $715 billion. That's obviously a lot of money, but any company that can lose $300 billion in stock valuation, something's happened during the year, hasn't it? Here's the thing I was not aware of. Microsoft is worth $754 billion. Take the numbers out of the equation. The idea that Microsoft is worth more than Apple is a real surprise to me. What does Microsoft make money out of these days? I mean, how many copies of Windows can they sell? How many Xboxes do they sell? That, I must confess, is a puzzle, because after all, Microsoft crashed out of the phone market, and yet here they are beating Apple by at least one metric, in this case market cap. Nvidia, also a real puzzle. Now, obviously in terms of PC gaming graphics, Nvidia stands out because it's just dominant. If you want a high-end graphics card, you buy an Nvidia. The question is which one and how much money does it cost you? We all have reasons for being unhappy with the graphics situation, but the idea that Nvidia has just had a market collapse in terms of its capitalization and share price, I mean, that it's halved in the last few months, which is just a real shock. Now, you can say that Nvidia is overpriced. Certain irony there. Graphics cards are overpriced, and so too with the market share. Nvidia's been hurt by the collapse of crypto mining, cryptocurrency, which personally is a joy to me in the sense that cryptocurrency and crypto mining has just really hurt us all, I think. Various companies have loved crypto, but gamers have hated it. And the price of Bitcoin in particular has just fallen hugely. It was just about $20,000 to the coin. I think it's now down around about $5,000. And as far as I'm concerned, it's got further to fall, and the sooner that happens, the better. But Nvidia was also hurt by overstock of 10 series graphics because they they appear to have started to manufacture more of the 10 series chips, GPUs, because mining was going to take the stock, and then mining didn't take the stock, and along came 20 series, and they had loads of 10 series while they're trying to sell 20 series. And as we know, reviews of 20 series have been mixed. Perfectly decent graphics chips, hugely expensive. What is ray tracing? The usual. We know this. On the other hand, if you want a gaming laptop, what are you going to buy apart from an Nvidia chipped laptop? So the fact their share price has fallen so hugely, a real surprise. But Nvidia as a tech giant in our world, yes, they are, absolutely. Intel. Now, here's the thing. Intel has had, in my opinion, a terrible year. I think it's had 2 terrible years, and yet their market capitalization, their share price, it's really rock solid. In that sense, they've done very well. They cannot make enough chips at their outrageous prices. They just can't. So the fact that 10 nanometer at the moment is a busted flush, they're making it 14 nanometer, nonetheless, Intel is selling all the chips it can make, despite the fact they're overpriced in most people's opinion. Xeons rule the server market, we know this. AMD EPYC is on the rise. In 2019, I'll be stunned if AMD doesn't take a hefty chunk of the server market off Intel. Let's say they take 20%, because at the moment Intel's got 99.9 goodness knows what percent. If AMD can take 20% of that market, that would be really good beans for AMD. Nonetheless, Intel still has 80%. So it's for Intel to lose. The idea that AMD is going to take more than 20% in 1 year, that would be a real surprise. So the direction of travel looks dubious for Intel, but in 2018, Intel has done a lot better probably than you think, certainly than I thought. There are other things that are going to hurt Intel, I think, certainly in the next year or two. For example, Amazon has its own ARM server chips now called Graviton. I did some reading up on this because I'd seen the news that Graviton was a thing. I hadn't appreciated this was a project that Amazon was doing in conjunction with AMD. The project fell apart back in 2015, where apparently AMD couldn't hit the benchmarks that Amazon was demanding. So Amazon went out and they bought Annapurna Labs, and I'd forgotten they'd done that. And then basically Annapurna developed the ARM chip that was going to be used by Amazon, which became Graviton. So it is an in-house chip, and it just shows the way that Amazon approaches things. AMD's not delivering what they want. Damn it, we'll buy our own company, we'll do it ourselves. Now, at the moment, I don't think that Graviton is a particularly significant thing except for it exists. So that's certainly something. But the fact that they can now say, well, we have an alternative. We don't have to go with Xeon. This is what we're going with. And you have to assume that Graviton's going to improve. After all, ARM is just... The development in ARM, particularly with the latest Qualcomm chips for 5G, looks hugely impressive. Performance is looking really good. So the idea that Amazon might switch some of their web servers over to their own Graviton chips makes perfect sense. And as those chips develop, it makes more and more sense. I don't know what they cost, obviously, but the idea they cost even a fraction of a Xeon makes no sense to me whatsoever. So going down that route makes sense. It does mean they're going to need proper software to run that's coded for ARM rather than x86. It's not quite as straightforward as it might seem. We've got the chips, we're done. Far from it. They've got to keep on developing. Nonetheless, if any company on the planet at the moment can do this, Amazon would appear to be that company. And then Amazon Web Services clearly is going to offer its own Graviton servers for customers across the piece. So the direction of travel there in the future for Intel looks incredibly shaky. Intel, bless them, and didn't think I'd ever say those words because that sounds quite condescending, but they seem to be going around in circles. They recently did this architecture day where they laid out, it wasn't really a roadmap, it was points, it was things that they're working on. But Intel's failures in recent times, so 5G, even though they're shouting out 5G as every company is, at the moment Intel, what have they got that actually that works, that exists? Very hard to tell. We've seen press releases, but in terms of actual products, no, we haven't. Intel has failed to put their own chips into mobile phones, just did not work. And obviously 10 nanometer has caused ructions for the past couple of years. Intel's Architecture Day, the points that came out of it, Sunny Cove, this is part of the core. This is not an architecture. It doesn't even, strictly speaking, seem to be a technology. It seems to be part of a chip design, and we are apparently going to see this in desktop processors and low-power chips as well during 2019. As to whether it's H1 or H2, first half or second half, that remains to be seen. And they're also talking about it being on 10 nanometer. Again, when we see it, we'll believe it. I mean, that obviously is well overdue, so it should happen sooner rather than later. There's talk about 11th gen graphics skipping 10, yeah, but in a sense, whatever. The fact that Intel chips will have some integrated graphics, obviously. The fact they might be better integrated graphics than they might otherwise be, okie dokie. But unless they're actually threatening either AMD or Nvidia with the power of their graphics, it's a detail rather than a fundamental change of direction. I don't know how to pronounce the add-in graphics name. Intel, it's XE. Is it Xi? Is it Z? Is it XE? Is it XE square? I really don't know. But capital X, lowercase e, these are the add-in graphics that are due in 2020. As to the form, whether they're going to be for compute on GPU, whether they're for artificial intelligence, the one thing I'm fairly confident is they won't be intended to be high-end gaming graphics cards, but, you know, why would they be? So there's that, due in 2020, so that's a year away. And then we've got this, I think, frankly, to sum up the Intel situation at the moment, the Intel Xeon W-3175X, that's the 28-core chip that was shown at Computex, apparently priced around $5,000 US. We haven't seen it yet. There's a week left of 2018. It was promised in 2018. Doesn't seem like it's going to happen. Even if it does, there are no motherboards to run it on. So presumably a launch at CES, and that's going to be a launch in the sense of, well, that was interesting, let's move along. So Intel has all manner of problems. They've got various promises for what's going to happen during 2019 and onwards, and yet despite what looks like just endless bad news, Intel has held solid in 2018, surprisingly. By contrast, mainstream media has had a bad 2018, and I'd say a bad 2017 as well. I'm talking radio, TV, newspapers across the piece. Now in the UK we've got the BBC. The BBC's pretty good. We've also got some quite decent newspapers. We've got newspapers that people tend to criticise a lot. We don't have so many of the ridiculous TV news stations to worry about here, so in that sense we're quite lucky. But then we're an unusual market because we've got the BBC is funded by essentially a tax. If you don't pay your licence fee, you go to court and then you go to jail. So the revenue for the BBC is rock solid, and as a result we do get quite decent, quite neutral news coverage here. However, mainstream media outside of the BBC, the people that actually have to sell their services or get advertising in, they are being hit, as is just everybody else in the world pretty much, by the fact that advertising is being gulped up by Facebook and Google. This is clearly a direction of travel that's hurting an awful lot of people. And the consequence you would hope would be that these newspapers and radio stations and TV stations, that they'd be better, but it doesn't seem to be. It seems they go for sort of clickbaity stuff. The quality of news has not improved. So for example, we've had a story going on here for the past few days that Gatwick Airport, which is like the second airport around, we've got about 6 airports around London, none of which are actually in, well, one's in London. Heathrow's obviously the biggest, Gatwick is the second largest, it's considerably smaller than Heathrow, and it was closed down for an entire day and a bit by a person or persons flying a drone or drones in the vicinity of the airport. So far, officialdom, their response has been pathetic. They don't seem to be clear how many drones there were, what kind of drones they were, where they flew from, who did it, why they did it. They don't seem to know anything. The only thing they seem to be clear about is there were indeed drones, and that's it. So this doesn't really fill you with confidence. And media coverage was, to my mind, fairly crud. So we saw endless stories of people stuck at Gatwick. You know, they were meant to be getting on planes, meant to be going off to do stuff, go on holiday, go home for Christmas in wherever that was, have a wedding, all sorts of things. I mean, no one flies after all. Well, not many people fly for the fun of it. So all these people had a story to tell. And it's a personal grief as far as I'm concerned, apart from unless your family sees you and go, oh, there he is. All these poor people stuck at the airport for a solid day or even 2 days, and the entire story behind the drones almost non-existent, just utterly hopeless. I mean, if you think about it, DJI released the original Phantom in 2013, January 2013, so we're talking just about 6 years ago. Now the Phantom is what? Yay sized, it's a proper piece of kit. They're now on Phantom 4. I'm not suggesting these drones are Phantoms. But DJI is a mainstream manufacturer. Phantoms are mainstream drones. You could fly a Phantom around, and if you were to hit an aircraft, I know they have geofencing, but the firmware can be hacked. Or indeed, if you flew it along some public occasion with some explosive strapped to it, you could do all sorts of damage. This is just patently obvious. And it turns out our authorities here in the UK simply were not aware or had no plan for this whatsoever. If an airport can't keep an eye out for drones and respond in some practical manner other than just shutting the place down, what the heck chance is there for any of us? And it shows that our government simply has no ability to respond to what technology is doing in any way, shape or form. And that's a physical things in the plural, because there seem to be more than one of these drones. It gives me no hope whatsoever that our government, and probably any government, knows the first thing about Amazon Echo and Alexa, Apple, the HomePod stuff and Siri, or Google Home and Assistant. In other words, all these devices people are going to have in their homes that are listening devices. They may or may not have cameras. They're listening to you. They're reporting stuff back to base. They're doing stuff with that data. This is what's going to be happening. Well, it's happening now, obviously, and it's going to be happening in the forever, probably, actually, unless something changes. I don't like the situation one little bit, but the idea that our government can't deal with drones, had no plan whatsoever. The idea they're going to do something about how Amazon should deal with data coming out of Alexa, I don't think there's a chance at the moment they've got the faintest clue. And I'm going to guess, whichever country you're in yourself, that your government doesn't either. If we rewind just over a year to the end of 2017, that was the first time we heard about Cambridge Analytica, which apparently swung the US election. Personally, I have my grave doubts about that. But what was quite clear was a significant part of the population of the US was appalled by the election result in 2016, and they wanted an explanation. And the snag was they actually had many explanations. And I think it suited quite a few people to believe that a section of the voting population, bear in mind it was a very narrow result. I mean, there's talks about landslides, it wasn't. What was it, 49% or something? The number of people that had to switch from one side to the other was not a lot. And it suited a fair few people to say that the public had been brainwashed, and that their social media was the cause. But the snag for Facebook and Google and the other social media giants is that they have to be able to say that they do indeed have massive influence over the public. Otherwise, they can't take in all that advertising revenue. So they are obliged to say, sure, we can swing opinion, no trouble whatsoever. This Cambridge Analytica thing, we had no idea. Totally outside of we just didn't realise. It was an error. It was an error and we should have done it. We should have stopped it. It was in the fine print. We didn't know. And we now know throughout this year that that's total rubbish. We've seen any number of Senate hearings, and over here in the UK parliamentary things, and I imagine across Europe similar things have been happening. It is clear that a great many software companies, Netflix, Spotify, companies such as that, basically any company that wants to know what customers are doing, what people are thinking, what are the trends, they know the value of Facebook, and Facebook's prepared to share information. The very least being is, who do you know? Who are your contacts? Who's on your list of friends? It's been crystal clear that they were happy to dish out this information because obviously it paid them in return. And in a sense, Cambridge Analytica was just the point where they go, ooh, perhaps we overstepped the mark. We can't deny this one. And it gave them a reason for explaining that last election. So going around the houses there, but there's an awful lot of it about, and during this year it's become apparent there's an awful lot of it about, and my concern is that if our government can't sort out a couple of drones that are shut down the airport, the idea they're going to deal with this, my confidence is absolutely rock bottom. We also have a very strange situation with the tech companies in Silicon Valley, because it turns out that they, or at least some of them, think it's actually their place to tell us how we should think and how we should behave. So, to quote, Tim Cook, CEO of Apple Inc., recently said, "The future should belong to those who use technology to build a better, more inclusive and more hopeful world." Maybe. I believe the most sacred thing each of us is given is our judgment, our morality, and choosing to set that responsibility aside at a moment of trial is a sin. This is a guy who sells phones, tablets, computers, and allows you to download music. It does not fill me with confidence one little bit to hear a man in that position and with that power and wealth saying that. Not one little bit, because it suggests if that's what he's laying out his stall there, if that's what he thinks, if he's talking about sin and saying that you've set aside your responsibility, if that's a sin, clearly it's beholden on him to fix it. And let's face it, the boss of Apple, he's in a position to do that. And it strikes me that the standard for success or failure for Silicon Valley is going to be the result of the 2020 US election, presidential election. Here's the thing. In the event the tech giants get the result they want in that election, they will have proved they can change, in their mind at least, they will have proved they can change the direction of American thinking. Thing is, if they lose, do you think they're going to go, actually, it turns out we can't? Not a chance. As far as I'm concerned, what they'll do is they'll double down and they'll push their views even harder. And that doesn't strike me as a good thing. So on the one hand, if they prove that they can indeed sway a slice of the American electorate to their preferred view, because after all, it's fighting sin, then that's not good. If, on the other hand, they push even harder, that's not good either. So I don't see how this ends well. I don't see for one moment that the American government's going to fix this. I mean, let's face it, it's warfare over there. So that's a concern to me. And the very idea that people are going to be asking Alexa or Siri how they should vote in anything, or ask Alexa or Siri's opinion on anything, I don't like that one little bit. Not one little bit. I bought some Netgear Orbi kit in the past few months to improve Wi-Fi here. I must confess, it actually works rather well. I'm very happy with it. One of the options for Orbi is that you can get a unit that is a smart speaker. It has an Orbi voice and it runs Alexa. It's an option, so I can either have that unit with it or this unit without it. I went for without. So this year it's an option. Just as in the past, my phone, it was an option to take out the battery if I wanted to really shut it down properly. These days I don't have any choice. I can't really shut it down properly, can I? I mean, if it wants to start again, it's going to start again. I have no say in the matter. And similarly with all the voice control and the microphones, at the moment they're options, and I have to wonder when that's going to be baked in without any say in the matter. Indeed, my Bose QC35s, they revised those, revision 2 of those. That comes with, which is it? Google? Alexa? I forget which. But the idea of blooming headphones of it baked in is just too terrible for words. So that's all miserable stuff, and me being all a bit about 2018. But we do have some good stuff. We can end on my little roundup of the techie stuff. So best prospect for 2019, in my opinion, AMD. AMD has got Rome Epic, the server chips. We are going to see Zen 2, which should be Ryzen 3000. That has huge promise. That could really shift the PC gaming desktop market significantly. And I'm now starting to have hope that Navi graphics may turn out well. I must confess, thinking it was going to be a waste of time. It's going to be maybe up to the standard of the previous generation of NVIDIA graphics and probably would cost too much money. And it's now hopefully going to be filling a gap in the market, it seems, or at the very least it'll prompt NVIDIA to push for GTX 11 series, which we had thought was dead, but it now turned, because they moved to RTX 20 series, but there is now rumour that they're going to have RTX 20, but they'll also have GTX 11. So the mid-range, the more sensibly priced graphics would appear to still be a thing for gamers. That's good, and if AMD can come along with something in that space, great, but right now it's the CPUs from AMD that are looking like they're going to be a really significant thing in 2019. Best tech site or YouTube channel of the year is GamersNexus. Obviously GamersNexus has been around for some years, but this past year they have just boomed. Steve Burke and his people have been working their socks off. Steve is the front man. There are at least 3 other people behind him, and they all seem to put in the hours. Steve has delivered some really good content. He delivers content almost daily, which is just terrifying to behold. And he has a community, which is also welcome. The number of questions put to Steve is good to see. And indeed, you can kind of get a feel for how he's getting on with his community by the number of dead graphics cards they're happy to send to him. I can't think of anybody else that could actually get quite that level of support from the people on his channel. So Steve, well done. What you're going to do next year we shall see, but this year has belonged to you. Biggest laughs of the year, probably inadvertently, but nonetheless, Intel commissioned Principal Technologies to produce a white paper to boost the Core i9-9900K, and that caused all sorts of ructions for all sorts of reasons. This white paper was out before we could do any reviews, so that wasn't good. We obviously had issues about it being biased. Steve Burke and his people took it to pieces, not least because it turns out PT is based quite close to them, so he just turned up and did an interview with the boss. In fairness to the boss of PT, he did the interview, and that went on for quite some time. So fair play to him for attempting to justify and explain his position. Nonetheless, they retested stuff and realized they'd made some errors as they were pointed out to them. So that didn't look too good for Intel. And also The Verge with their terrible PC build, which we just mocked because, it wasn't good. And Bitwit Lyle, the alter ego of Bitwit Kyle, he did a riposte to both Principal Technologies and also to The Verge, and they were just hysterical. Not that Kyle needs any plaudits from us. I mean, his channel has boomed also in the last year and two. 1.2 million, 1.4 million. Number of subscribers has gone through the roof. He's doing very well, but with that content, frankly, he deserves it. Fair play to him. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Do subscribe. Hit that button. We'll let you know about new videos as they become available. I'm Leo Warder for KitGuru with a somewhat maudlin roundup of the year, but this was nonetheless Leo Says.